So font stacks, you don't have to just apply a single font, but you apply a comma-separated list of them, and the order matters. The first one that is found, is available, has the right glyph, will get used. So here's a problem, for example. You'll often get this. You'll have, say you've got some text and it's in Japanese, and you've also got some Latin text, some English or something. And basically, the Latin glyphs in the Japanese font suck. So what you do is something like that. You put a Latin font first, and then you put the Japanese font second, and then life is good. Until you find that the person doing the Latin font did a little bit of experimentation and maybe did some kana or something like that. So it also has some sucky Japanese characters that you don't want to use, and you can't put them both first, right? What do you do? Does anyone know what you do, actually, before I go on to my next slide? Oh, come on, wake up. No? Nobody? Subset is, yes, that's an option. There's an easier option. There's a descriptor called Unicode range, which tells you what range of characters you can use in a font. Now, notice I'm being quite precise here. It's which ones you can use. If there's others in there, they will not be used. It's not saying this font has got all of this range of characters, okay? It's not making that promise. So here is an example. So I've got a font family there, and I've got a point off to some Japanese thing, and I tell it to only use the Japanese characters, which, as you can see, A5 is the yen symbol, 400 is kanji. You know all these off by heart. No, you don't. I have to look them. We've got a heading, and we want to have a nice swishy ampersand, and we don't want to go sticking spans in it, because that means we're putting in markup just for the sake of presentation, and you shouldn't have to do that. And the Unicode code point for the ampersand is 26. So that's what you do. Here's an example. I've already got a font face for a nice swishy ampersand-like font, and I'll add that on to the beginning of the font stack. Ba-ding! And suddenly, without any extra markup, the ampersand changes to a nice swishy one. And there you can see the markup there. There's no extra span or anything. I'm not cheating. So there we are. That's an example of the sort of thing you can do.
Object fit is a kind of interesting one. And you're defining how the content, typically an image or a video, should react to the width and height of its bounding box. Cool. So we've got this waffle who's, I guess, got intoxicated. But what I want you to pay attention to is the tile, because I'm going to stretch the video, and it's interesting to pay attention to the size of the tiles to see how it's being stretched. So this is without specifying any object fit. But if you say object fit fill, that video stretches, it literally fills, it is what it sounds like, it fills the bounding box. And you can see now that tile is super stretched. It's like you've gone into Photoshop and without holding shift, you've just like dragged, you've resized everything just to fit some arbitrary like bounding box. However, if you say object fit contain, which is probably, I guess it's the property which most people will use, it will expand that video as much as it possibly can, but it will like maintain that aspect ratio.
What I want to focus on instead is the challenges you'll face working with SAS to do something that's reusable and can be packaged as a library and so on. So when I say API library here, I don't mean it's for doing HTTP requests from SAS directly or anything. I mean it's for hooking into services that will embed third-party CSS into your own. And the most prominent example of this, and actually the only example of this that I know of, though there must be others, is Google Web Fonts.
CSS is more durable as well because different modules cannot overwrite each other. Your code is more maintainable. You can jump in without fear and change unique classes because you know that they won't affect anything in a completely unrelated part of your application. And problems like specificity will be made more manageable because you're dealing with specificity on a much smaller scale. And sharing code is easier. Your homepage team can name their classes using terms that suit them. And your checkout team can do the same, and their CSS won't break each other.
This was basically one of the most challenging steps in this project, how to tell the management that you need 4 weeks of feature freeze, and the user interface will exactly look the same after that. So basically, you can't just go to your management and say, hey, stop, 4 weeks, I need to refactor all the code, and they come with a valid question, why didn't you write the code in the first place, and how you should do it. Yeah. So you have to, what's basically one of the most learnings of this project, you have to prove the benefits, you have to at least document the downside of the current state, and with all those metrics I showed before, stuff like a specificity graph might not really understandable for non-technical people, but stuff like how many buttons you use, how many colors or icons you have, will also convince non-technical people that this needs to be cleaned up and avoided in the future. Of course, we as developers would like to have rewritten the whole front end, but this would have taken a much longer time frame, and we of course also have to see the business side. On the core product, the Trivago Hotel Search, are working more than 200 people, designers, product owners, developers, and it's just impossible to stop product development for a longer period of time.
So now let's put these things together. We've kind of talked about the theory behind musical scales and mathematics, and type scales and modularity. Now, what do musical intervals lined up to the type specimens they represent, the font sizes they would create, actually look and sound like? The octave, as we covered earlier in the introduction, is an even doubling. So here the headline is twice the font size of the body. Pretty simple, very basic.
Well, personally, I'm sick of writing code for the same components over and over again from project to project. What I want to be able to do is create reusable components that I can use on several projects, or even better, package up and share them with other developers and have them be able to use them in their projects. Now, it seems like componentization has been one of the topics of the day. We've had some awesome talks on Sass and CSS modules and achieving them that way. But you often find with those that it's great for newer code bases, but it doesn't stop existing styles, say scope to element selectors like button, from bleeding into your nicely new button class that you've generated.
Another example is a bit more, visible in terms of seeing the audio. You can control a bunch of different things, not just the gradients, but also the size of elements, their speed of rotation, and you can compose visualizations that are really cool visually, all by combining different features of CSS dynamic behavior, so transitions and animations and the different colors, and you can create experiences like this. The third example is also incorporating sort of CSS 3D transforms. So we have this cube that's rotating, and we have the backgrounds and the gradients in the background, and we're creating sort of a kaleidoscope effect. And we're also able to control the box shadow on the box, to make it pump. So this is kind of cool, I think.
Your projects are only as approachable as you make them. Now, because I couldn't find any Medium posts to blatantly steal from, I'm going to have to define approachability in software. And I thought, because good things come in threes, let's do the Triforce of approachability. Accessibility, automation, and amicability. That's a rule of three and alliteration. We're on fire.
Here's the color wheel. Raise your hand if you've seen the color wheel before in an art class or in a school. Keep your hand raised if you know that it's also documentation for using color. When you are using colors is to understand what you're doing. You should always be able to answer why. And here, if you get two colors that appear to have no relationship between them, your eyeballs are going to freak out and not know what's going on. It's just like when you try to Photoshop somebody into a photo and you're like, you don't belong there, I see something's different. So one of the easiest way to do this is to establish a relationship between them by using the mix function, which all it means is that this color, I'm just going to go to the picture down here, I made this yesterday. So here's what we're really doing, is we're saying this red right here gets a little bit of the blue, and this blue right here gets a little bit of the orange or red, and that will desaturate the colors a little bit together and create immediately similar lighting conditions. And what this does is it creates, I can almost see a difference up on the projector. It creates these similar lighting conditions that tell your brain, don't worry about it, these two colors belong together, and you immediately create a situation where you're not alerting your brain like, oh, something's off, this doesn't look right, and it doesn't pop.
Let's take a look at this bit of CSS. I'm sure we've all seen CSS like this before. There are a number of things wrong with this. First thing, it's called button login. We're describing a very specific use case here. We can't really use this for anything else. It's very unreusable. But the second problem is that we're mixing up our responsibilities. Another definition of the single responsibility principle is that everything should have a single reason to change. Currently, this has got 3 reasons to change. Button login has 3 different reasons to change. We've got base responsibilities, we've got structural responsibilities, and we've got cosmetic responsibilities. This entire rule set handles 3 different jobs. Simply abstracting this out into 3 separate selectors means that everything now only has 1 reason to change. We've got a base class, we've got a sizing class, and we've got a cosmetic class. It's a much nicer way of working. We can get the exact same button out the other end of it, out of the other end of this, but it's all optional. It's all far more combinable, composable, configurable.